Good afternoon. Welcome to a revisit of Ina Coolbrith's Salon. This afternoon, members of the ICC, the Ina Coolbrith Circle, will bring us a revisit of the world of Ina Coolbrith, California's first poet laureate, and read well-known poems by Ina's contemporaries. Interspersed with these readings will be selections from Ambrose Bierce's Devil's Dictionary. Ambrose Bierce was a columnist, a journalist, a wit who had nothing kind to say about anyone. Our first reader will be Richard Angeli.
As George Sterling, I just returned from the artist colony in Carmel and treat all you Bohemians at this year's Grove ceremony. Cheers! And now here's a new poem for my favorite city, San Francisco, the cool, gray city of love. Though I die on a distant strand, and they give me a grave in that land, yet carry me back to my own city, carry me back to her grace and pity. For I think I could not rest afar from her mighty breast. She is fairer than others are, whom they sing the beauty of. Her heart is a song and a star, my cool gray city of love. Though they tear the rose from her brow, to her is ever my vow. Ever to her I give my duty, first in rapture, first in beauty. Wayward, passionate, brave, glad of the life God gave. The sea winds are her kiss, and the seagull is her dove. Cleanly and strong she is, my cool gray city of love. The winds of the future wait at the iron walls of her gate, and the western ocean breaks in thunder, and the western stars go slowly under. And her gaze is ever west, in the dream of her young unrest. Her sea is a voice that calls, and her star is a voice above. And her wind, a voice on her walls, my cool gray city of love. Though they stay her feet at the dance, in her is the far romance. Under the rain of winter falling, vine and rose will await recalling. Though the dark be cold and blind, yet her sea fog's touch is kind, and her mightiest caress is joy and the pain thereof. Oh, great is thy tenderness, O cool, gray city of love.
From the Devil's Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce. Agitator. A statesman who shakes the fruit trees of his neighbors to dislodge the worms. Accuse. To affirm another's guilt or unworth, most commonly as a justification of ourselves for having wronged him. Acknowledge. To confess. Acknowledgement of one another's faults is the highest duty imposed by our love of truth. Allah, the Mohammedan supreme being, as distinguished from the Christian, Jewish, and so forth. Funeral, a pageant whereby we attest our respect for the dead by enriching the undertaker and strengthen our grief by an expenditure that deepens our groans and doubles our tears. Accordion, an instrument in harmony with the sentiments of an assassin. Our next reader is Robert Eastwood, Robinson Jeffers.
Although Robertson Jeffers was not in the immediate circle of Ina Coolbrith, he was a contemporary, and every poet within Ina's circle was familiar with Robinson Jeffers, and they associated with one another in California. In fact, Robinson is, as some say, the quintessential California poet. If you've been to Carmel by the Sea, perhaps you've seen the Tor House, which he built himself, hauling rocks up from the ocean. And I've got several poems of Robinson's to read today. The thing that's distinctive about Robinson Jeffers, as compared to the other poets you'll hear, is that he didn't write in rhyme, and his lines were long and were more syllabic than formed by meter. The first poem was published in 1925, and it's called Shine, Perishing Republic. While this America settles in the mold of its vulgarity, heavily thickening to empire and protest, and only a bubble in the molten mass, pops and sighs out, and the mass hardens. I sadly, smiling, remember that the flower fades to make fruit, the fruit rots to make earth. Out of the mother, and through the spring exultances, ripeness and decadence, and home to the mother. You making haste, haste on decay, not blameworthy. Life is good. It's stubbornly long, or suddenly a mortal splendor. Meteors are not needed, less than mountains. Shine, perishing republic. But for my children, I would have them keep their distance from the thickening center. Corruption never has been compulsory, and when the cities lie at the monster's feet, there are left the mountains. And boys, be a nothing so moderate as in love of man, a clever servant, insufferable master. There is the trap that catches noblest spirits, that caught, they say, God when he walked on earth. The next poem is quite famous. In fact, it made Robinson famous. It was published in 1928, the same year, I believe, that Ina died. And it's called Hurt Hawks. 1. The broken pillar of the wing jags from the clouded shoulder. The wing trails like a banner in defeat. No more to use the sky forever, but live with famine and pain a few days. Cat or coyote will shorten the week of waiting for death. There is game without talons. He stands under the oak bush and waits the lame feet of salvation. At night he remembers freedom and flies in a dream, and dawns ruin it. He is strong, and pain is worse to the strong. Incapacity is worse. The curs of the day come and torment him at distance. No one but death, the Redeemer, will humble that head, the intrepid readiness, the terrible eyes. The wild God of the world is sometimes merciful to those that ask mercy, not often to the arrogant. You do not know him, you communal people, or you have forgotten him, intemperate and savage. The hawk remembers him. Beautiful and wild, the hawks, and men that are dying remember him. 2. I'd sooner accept the penalties, kill a man, than kill a hawk. But the great red tail had nothing left but unable misery from the bones too shattered for mending, the wing that trailed under his talons when he moved. We had fed him for 6 weeks. I gave him freedom. He wandered over the foreland hill and returned in the evening, asking for death, not like a beggar, still-eyed with the old implacable arrogance. I gave him the lead gift in the twilight. What fell was relaxed, owl downy, soft feminine feathers. But what soared, the fierce rush, the night herons by the flooded river cried fear at its rising, before it was quite unsheathed from reality.
From the Devil's Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce. Razor, an instrument used by the Caucasian to enhance his beauty, by the Mongolian to make a man of himself. Reason, to weigh probabilities in the scales of desire. Recruit, a person distinguishable from a civilian by his uniform and from a soldier by his gait. Rector, in the Church of England, the third person of the parochial trinity, the curate and the vicar being the other two. Redemption, deliverance of sinners from the penalty of their sin through the murder of their deity against whom they sinned. The doctrine of redemption is the fundamental mystery of our holy religion, and whoso believeth in it shall not perish, but have everlasting life in which to try to understand it. Reality, the dream of a madman, the dream of a mad philosopher, that which would remain if one should essay a phantom, the nucleus of a vacuum. Railroad, the chief of many mechanical devices enabling us to get away from where we are to where we are no better off. For this purpose, the railroad is held in highest favor by the optimist, for it permits him to make the transit with great expedition. Recollect, to recall with additions something not previously known. Reconciliation, a suspension of hostilities, an armed truce for the purpose of digging up the dead. Radicalism, the conservatism of tomorrow injected into the affairs of today. Stan will bring us a reading from... Oh, you're right. Sorry. Sherry on Jack London.
First, thank you to Maggie for this fun assignment. She said, fill 10 minutes. I can fill hours with what I've learned about Jack London. Also, thanks to Alita George for the best book, which I have to read in small doses because so many people's lives were very, very sad and the decisions they made were also. And also, I have to credit a few websites for some information I picked up. First, a few facts for those like me who are not Jack London scholars. Jack London brief 40 years began January 12, 1876 and ended November 22, 1916. At one website I read that his name at birth was John Griffith Cheney, that it was believed he was the biological son of William Cheney, an itinerant astrologer and journalist, who married, in quotes, then deserted Jack's mother, Flora, a spiritualist, before Jack was born. 8 months after Jack was born, Flora married John London, a Civil War veteran who had recently moved to San Francisco. Jack did not learn the true circumstances of his birth until he was in his early 20s. The California Historical Society has placed a plaque at 3rd and Brannan Streets in San Francisco that states it marks the birthplace of the noted author Jack London, unquote. The plaque marks the location of the home of the Slocums, friends of Flora, Jack's mother, where it has been said she was living after her reported suicide attempt and release from Dr. Rutley's, which was on Mission Street. Much of Jack London's youth was spent in Oakland, California, on the waterfront. He completed grade school, 8th grade, and worked at various hard labor jobs. He pirated for oysters on San Francisco Bay, served on a fish patrol to capture poachers, sailed the Pacific on a seal hunting ship, joined Kelly's army of unemployed working men, hoboed around the country, and returned to attend high school at age 19. Always a prolific reader, he found at the Oakland Library a friend, Ina Coolbrith, whose influence was to affect him deeply. She gathered him under her wing and guided him along an orderly literary path. Little did either realize that Miss Coolbrith would become the nation's first poet laureate and that Jack would emerge from a poverty-stricken background to become one of the most popular authors in California. He was 21 when he spent the winter of 1897 in the Yukon. In 1899, he began publishing in the Overland Monthly. From that point on, he was a highly disciplined writer, producing more than 50 volumes of stories, novels, and political essays. Although The Call of the Wild in 1903 brought him lasting fame, many of his short stories deserve to be called classics, as does his critique of capitalism and poverty in The People of the Abyss, 1903 also, and his stark discussion of alcoholism in John Barleycorn, 10 years later. Jack London's 1907-09 voyage with his second wife, Charmian, and a crew across the Pacific in a small boat provided material for books and stories about Polynesian and Melanesian cultures. I was happy to find out that he was instrumental in breaking the taboo over leprosy and popularizing Hawaii as a tourist spot. He was among the most publicized figures of his day and used this pulpit to endorse his support of socialism, women's suffrage, and eventually prohibition. He was among the first writers to work with the movie industry and saw his novels made into films, among them White Fang and The Sea Wolf. The latter became the basis for the first full-length American movie. He was also one of the first celebrities to use his endorsement for commercial products in advertising, including dress suits and grape juice, kind of rhymes. Because his writings were translated into several dozen languages, he remains more widely read in some countries outside of the United States than in his home country. Study of his life and writings provides a case through which to examine the contradictions in the American character, along with key movements and ideas prominent during his time. One website provided the following information about his marriages as well as the above about his birth. In 1900, Jack married his math tutor and friend, Bess Mattern. It was a Victorian marriage typical of the time, based on, in quotes, good breeding, not love. With Bess, he had 2 daughters. Following his separation from Bess in 1903, he married his secretary, Charmian Kittredge, whom he considered his, in quotes, mate woman, and with whom he found true love. Together they played, traveled, wrote, and enjoyed life. Their one-child Joy lived for only 38 hours. In 1907, with Charmaine, Jack sailed the Pacific to the South Seas in the Snark, which became the basis for his book, The Cruise of the Snark. With Charmian at his side, he also developed his Beauty Ranch on 1,400 acres of land in Glen Ellen, California. However, Alita's book, which everybody must read, does not paint as sanguine a picture of his unabiding love for his second wife. See page 206 if you want to go straight to the source. About which more later, but back to Ina, whom Jack London never forgot. In a letter to Ina Coolbrith, Jack wrote, "Do you know, you were the first one who ever complimented me on my choice of reading matter. Nobody at home bothered their heads over what I read. I was an eager, thirsty, hungry little kid, and one day at the library I drew out a volume on Pizarro in Peru. I was 10 years old. You got the book and stamped it for me, and as you handed it to me, you praised me for reading books of that nature. Proud? If you only knew how proud your words made me. For I thought a great deal of you. You were a goddess to me. I didn't know you were a poet, or that you'd ever done so wonderful a thing as write a line. I was raw from a ranch, you see, but I stood greatly in awe of you, worshipful awe. No woman has so affected me to the extent you did. I was only a little lad. I knew absolutely nothing about you, yet in all the years that have passed, I have met no woman so noble as you. I have never seen you since those library days, yet the memory picture I retain of you is as vivid as any I possess. Often and often, the mere word, noble, recalls you to my mind. Do forgive me what you may deem my foolishness. I am all iron these days, but I remember my childhood. I remember you, and I have room in me yet, and softness too, for memories. Sincerely yours, Jack London." In an early letter, Jack London inadvertently revealed a major weakness of his poetry, along with a major strength of his fiction, in quotes. "Poetry in the English language," he wrote, "is bound always to be stilted, but the true aim of the artist should be, or the very essence of the art is, to reduce the stilt, S-T-I-L-T, to a minimum, yet still musically voice the poetic thought or fancy." Although he failed to do so in his poetry, London would reduce stilt to a minimum and musically voice thought in his fiction. There are scores of lyrical passages from his stories and novels, like this one, from The Call of the Wild, highly praised by veteran New York critic Maxwell Geismar. "There is an ecstasy that marks the summit of life, and beyond which life cannot rise, and such is the paradox of living. This ecstasy comes when one is most alive, and it comes as a complete forgetfulness that one is alive. This ecstasy, this complete forgetfulness comes to the artist, caught up and out of himself in a sheet of flame, and it came to Buck, leading the pack, sounding the old wolf cry, straining after the food that was alive, and that fled swiftly before him through the moonlight. He was sounding the deeps of his nature, and of his parts of his nature that were deeper than he, going back into the womb of time. He was mastered by the sheer surging of life, the tidal wave of being, the perfect joy of each separate muscle, joint, and sinew, in that it was everything that was not death, that it was aglow and rampant, expressing itself in movement, flying exultantly under the stars and over the face of dead matter that did not move." Often troubled by physical ailments, London developed kidney disease of unknown origin during his 30s. One account has him dying of renal failure. At the jacklondon.com website, I read, he retired to his ranch near Sonoma, where he died at age 40 of various diseases and drug treatments. At another website I read, by his death at age 40, Jack had been plagued for years by a vast number of health problems, including stomach disturbances, ravaging uremia, and failing kidneys. His death certificate states that he died of uremic poisoning. Alita's book, page 206, reports that George Sterling disputed the newspaper accounts, claiming that London killed himself because he was in love with 2 women, and that although Sterling didn't know who the other woman was, London's wife did. According to another, she was Hawaiian. I'll close with a short 11-line Jack London poem that Maggie provided. "I would rather be ashes than dust, I would rather that my spark should burn out in a brilliant blaze than it should be stifled by dry rot. I would rather be a superb meteor, every atom of me in magnificent glow, than a sleepy and permanent planet. The proper function of man is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days in trying to prolong them. I shall use my time. Thanks.
From Ambrose Bierce's Devil's Dictionary. Rank, relative elevation in the scale of human worth. Rapacity, providence without industry, the thrift of power. Quorum, a sufficient number of members of a deliberative body to have their own way, and their own way of having it. In the United States Senate, a quorum consists of the chairman of the Committee on Finance and a messenger from the White House. In the House of Representatives, of the Speaker and the devil. Quotation, the act of repeating erroneously the words of another. Quotient, a number showing how many times a sum of money belonging to one person is in the pocket of another, usually about as many times as it can be got there. Rabble, in a republic, those who exercise a supreme authority tempered by fraudulent elections. The rabble is like the sacred simurgh of Arabian fable, omnipotent on condition that it do nothing. Rack, an argumentative implement formerly much used in persuading devotees of a false faith to embrace the living truth. As a call to the unconverted, the rack never had any particular efficacy, and now is held in light popular esteem. Ransom, the purchase of that which neither belongs to the seller nor can belong to the buyer, the most unprofitable of investments. Quiver, a portable sheath in which the ancient statesman and the aboriginal lawyer carried their lighter arguments. Rascal, a fool considered under another aspect. Rash, insensible to the value of our advice. Rational, devoid of all delusions save those of observation, experience, and reflection. Our next reader is Stan Warner on Bret Hart.
Hello, and I'm reading Bret Hart today. One of the things that I came across with this is that a lot of people know Bret Hart for his stories, but didn't know that he also wrote poetry. Well, he did, and he used the name of Plain James to tell some of his stories here. I'm going to read two of his Plain Jane poems today. First one is called The Society Upon the Stanislaus. I reside at Table Mountain, and my name is Truthful James. I am up to no small deceit or any sinful games, and I'll tell in simple language what I know about the row that broke up our society upon the Stanislaus. But first I would remark that it is not a proper plan for any scientific gent to whale his fellow man. And if a member don't agree with his particular whim, to lay for that same member to put a head on him. Now, nothing could be finer and more beautiful to see than the first 6 months proceeding of that same society. Till Brown of Calaveras brought a lot of fossil bones that he found within a tunnel near the tenement of Jones. Then Brown, he read a paper, and he reconstructed there from those same bones an animal that was extremely rare. And Jones then asked the chair for a suspension of the rules till he could prove that those same bones were one of his lost mules. Then Brown, he smiled a bitter smile and said he was at fault. It seems he had been trespassing on James's family vault. He was a most sarcastic man, this quiet Mr. Brown, and on several occasions he had cleaned out the town. Now, I hold it is not decent for a scientific gent to say another is an ass, at least to all intent. Nor should that individual who happens to be meant reply by heaving rocks at him to any great extent. Then Abner Dean of Angels raised a point of order when a chunk of old red sandstone took him in the abdomen, and he smiled a kind of sickly smile and curled up on the floor. And the subsequent proceedings interested him no more. For less time than I take to write, every member did engage in a warfare with the remnants of the Paleozoic age. And the way they heaved those fossils in their anger was a sin. Till the skull of an old mammoth caved the head of Thompson in. And this is all I have to say about those improper games, for I live at Table Mountain and my name is Truthful James. And I've told in simple language what I know about the row that broke up our society upon the Stanislaw. Okay, I was not going to read this poem because, number one, Bret Harte said this is the worst poem he ever wrote. And he had a good reason for that. Number two, he coined the phrase that is often used, the heathen Chinese. Now, I'm a great lover of Chinese philosophy and poetry, and although I'm not politically correct in most other ways, I didn't really kind of like the idea of this poem. But I found out in 1859, Bret Harte was thrown out of Arcata for writing a story that was sympathetic, they felt, to the Indians. And that he was also in sympathy with the Chinese laborers. If I take this poem out of context, it sounds like something quite different. So with this preface, I will read another poem by Truthful James. And this is called Plain Language from Truthful James. Which I wish to remark, and my language is plain, that for ways that are dark and tricks that are vain, the heathen Chinese is peculiar, which the same I would rise to explain. Ah, Sin was his name, and I shall not deny, in regard to the same, what the name might imply. But his smile, it was pensive, as I frequently remarked to Bill Nye. It was August the 3rd, and quite soft were the skies, which it might be inferred that Ah Sin was likewise. Yet he played it that day upon William and me in a way I despise. We had a small game. Ah Sin took a hand. It was euchre, the same. He did not understand. But he smiled as he sat at the table with a smile that was childlike and bland. Yet the cards, they were stocked in a way that I grieve, and my feelings were shocked at the state of Nye's sleeve, which was stuffed full of aces and bowers, and the same, with the intent to deceive. But the hands that were played by that heathen Chinese, and the points that he made were quite frightful to see. Till at last he put down a right bower, which the same Nye had dealt to me. Then I looked up at Nye, and he gazed up at me, and he rose with a sigh and said, "Can this be? We are ruined by Chinese cheap labor." And he went for that heathen Chinese. In the scene that ensued, I could not take a hand, but the floor was strewed like the leaves on a strand. But the cards that Ah Sin had been hiding in the game, he did not understand, In his sleeves, which were long, he had 24 jacks, which was coming in strong. Yet I state but the facts, and we found his nails, which were taper, which is frequently in tapers, that's wax. Which is why I remark, and my language is plain, that this weighs the dark in the tricks that are vain. The heathen Chinese is peculiar, which the same I am free to maintain.
From the Devil's Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce. Accordion, an instrument in harmony with the sentiments of an assassin. Accountability, the mother of caution. Accuse, to affirm another's guilt or unworth, most commonly as a justification of ourselves for having wronged him. Administration, an ingenious abstraction in politics designed to receive the kicks and cuffs due to the premier or president, a man of straw, proof against bad egging and dead catting. Affliction, an acclimatizing process preparing the soul for another and bitter world. Age, that period of life in which we compound for the vices that we still cherish by reviling those that we have no longer the enterprise to commit. Agitator, a statesman who shakes the fruit trees of his neighbors to dislodge the worms. Tree, a tall vegetable intended by nature to serve as a penal apparatus. Though through a miscarriage of justice, most trees bear only a negligible fruit, or none at all. When naturally fruited, the tree is a beneficent agency of civilization and an important factor in public morals. In the stern West and the sensitive South, its fruit, white and black respectively, though not eaten, is agreeable to the public taste, and though not exported, profitable to the general welfare. That the legitimate relation of the tree to justice was no discovery of Judge Lynch, who indeed conceded in no primacy over the lamppost and the bridge girder, is made trial. Tanya Joyce will read Joaquin Miller.
I was really thrilled to be asked to read Joaquin Miller because for 10 years I lived just downhill from his house, The Heights. And although Maggie has told me with the smile she often gets in her eyes what a rascal he is, he's widely conceived as one, but he did a lot of other things. Some of them are summarized on this sheet that I made for everybody. Natika has other copies, and I have some if anyone wants. The pictures are of Miller's house, The Heights, which he spelled Hights, among other things. He liked spelling reform, or the idea of spelling reform. A couple of years ago, the Friends of Joaquin Miller Park restored the facade of his house. And I used to like to just go there and sit on the front steps. I think some of his spirit and some of his audacity remains in this very tiny house that was his for a long time. In the lower left, there's a picture of what the land looked like when he first built it. There was not a tree or a bush in sight. The entire East Bay Hills had been logged of the redwoods, and the stumps and everything were removed with the idea that housing would soon be there. But Miller was a Johnny Appleseed of deciduous and evergreen trees, and he and his friends planted over 7,000 trees. And you can see by a couple of the pictures on the right that he knew what grows quickly and what doesn't, because in just a few years there was a lot of trees around the place. He went to England. He took a wreath of laurel. I never understood why this was until recently, that he and Ina Coolbrith had picked and put it on Byron's grave. The reason that that created a huge brouhaha was that Byron had led a rather rascally life himself, and although his poetry was widely acknowledged as being excellent, he was refused the place that he'd first been intended to be buried in Westminster Abbey because of his private life. It was not as Victorian as the people at Westminster Abbey would like. So when this upstart American in stage Western dress came with a wreath of laurel and went to the small town where Byron's grave is and put the wreath of laurel there, it was a scandal. But because Miller was a huge hit in England, the scandal was, what'll I say, promoted, but it didn't do any harm to him. I'm going to read one of his poems called Columbus, which was from an anthology that was designed for 6th grade kids to learn from. In his day, early part of the 20th century now, it was the thing to do for kids to read poetry and memorize it. And they often recited this particular poem. Miller wrote it very much toward the end of his life. And I think because he had done so many things, he undoubtedly took Columbus as an image of somebody who's set out to do things nobody's done before. This poem has a version of the same line at the end of every stanza, and at the top of the text side of the handout is a little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with the lines. So I would like the audience to join in the last line of every stanza, and I'll give you a high sign when we get to the 5th line. Columbus by Joaquin Miller. Behind him lay the gray Azores, behind the gates of Hercules. Before him, not a ghost of shores. Before him, only shoreless seas. The good maid said, now must we pray, for lo, the very stars are gone. Brave admiral, speak. What shall I say? Why say, sail on, and on. My men grow mutinous day by day. My men grow ghastly wan and weak. The stout maid thought of home. A spray of salt wave washed his swarthy cheek. What shall I say, brave admiral? Say, if we sight naught but seas at dawn. Why, you shall say at break of day, sail on, and on. They sailed and sailed as winds might blow, until at last the blanched mate said, why now not even God would know, should I and all my men fall dead. These very winds forget their way, for God from these dread seas is gone. Now speak, brave admiral, speak and say, he said, sail on, and on. They sailed, then spake the mate, this mad sea shows his teeth tonight. He curls his lip, he lies in wait, with lifted teeth as if to bite. Brave admiral, say but one good word. What shall we do when hope is gone? The words leapt like a leaping sword. Sail on, and on. Then pale and worn, he kept his deck and peered through darkness. Ah, that night of all dark nights. And then a speck, a light, a light, a light, a light. It grew, a starlit flag unfurled. It grew to be time's burst of dawn. He gained a world. He gave that world its grandest lesson. On, sail on. Thank you.
I want to thank Alita and Sherry and Richard and Stan and Robert for their presentations. And I hope that you will read Alita's book and find those poems there. Thank you very much.